Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you to the sponsors, caterers, vendors, venue staff, organizers. We wouldn't be here without you. So please take a moment, if you're so inclined, to tweet thanks to these folks or thank them in person. You can use the hashtag #PositivePython. That's a good one when you're being thankful about Python-y things in your life. I do have another very special thank you to give to Lacey Williams-Henschel. She has done 1,000 kind things for me since I came to Portland for Write the Docs and PyCon. She's an amazing friend and mentor in person, and I'm so glad to know her. So thank you, Lacey, wherever you are. Hey. And also thank you to Jessica McKellar. I never expected to find myself on stage at PyCon, and I would not have done it if Jessica had not reached out to me multiple times and said, I want you to speak at PyCon. Please apply. No, I'm serious. So thank you to Jessica as well. So haven't we met before? These are some of the organizations I'm involved in. I'm an organizer of PyLadies ATL and former co-organizer of PyATL, only because I moved. I'm an organizer for Django Girls Atlanta. I'm the editor of the weekly Your Django Stories series. I'm an O'Reilly contributor. I'm the tech editor for Head First Python 2nd edition. I just wrapped a contract with the Django Software Foundation, doing fundraising for them, and I still do fundraising for Write the Docs. Finally, I work full-time in support at Emma, an email marketing company based in Nashville. So being here is a huge honor. As I said, Python is the first language I tried to learn when I started back in 2011. I was trying to learn just enough so that I can contribute to Media Goblin, so that I could apply to the outreach program for women, what is now Outreachy. There was a gap of a few years there where I lost steam and nothing seemed to stick, but after firmly recommitting myself to Python 2 years ago, I never thought I'd find myself on stage here, as I said, so again, thank you for having me. In fact, the very first time I spoke at a tech conference was actually February 2015 at PyTennessee, and a year later, I was invited back to give a keynote. And it was my experience preparing to speak at my first tech conference that inspired today's topic about connecting with others with authenticity. I didn't know it then, but speaking at PyTennessee was a pivotal moment for me. It was the first step that launched so many other cool things, including being here. But the thing is, it almost didn't happen. Why? Well, while preparing for that talk, I received some very bad advice. And it was scary enough that it almost cost me the talk. So let me take you back. It was late 2014, and I was getting serious about learning Python and sharing my journey on my blog, Coding with Knives. I was working through tutorials, sharing updates on how things were going, alongside original recipes and cooking tips, like how to buy knives. I didn't have a lot of readers, but I did have one very special reader, Jason Myers, the organizer of PyTennessee, a regional Python conference. He liked what I was doing with my cooking and coding blog, and he invited me to speak at PyTennessee. So I submitted a proposal, I was accepted, I was funded, and I was elated. So my next question was what to talk about. Coding with Knives was the obvious choice. People love hearing about the intersection of cooking and coding, and how these two very different subjects can inform one another in compelling ways. And after all, that's what I'd been invited to talk about. But I was super nervous to be headed to a conference for a language that I had not mastered, and in fact was actively documenting my non-mastery for the world to see. So in the lead up to the event, I tried to cram in as much Python as possible. I knew it was futile, but I really wanted to catch them all. How could I feel confident when I was terrified? Well, I realized the terror wouldn't go away, so why not have some fun with it? I decided I would bake a whole bunch of cookies for my audience, wear my favorite flouncy Betsy Johnson dress, and give my talk. Feeling excited, I naturally told a few friends and allies what I was thinking about for my talk. And while there was some encouragement naturally, you can imagine my surprise at some of the pushback. This is 2015. So even though I had been invited to give a talk because of Coding with Knives, where I document this career transition from personal chef to Python developer, I started second-guessing myself big time. Imposter syndrome kicked into its highest gear. I considered writing the conference organizer and saying, "I'm not sure I can do this. Maybe you should find someone else to speak." In fact, that's kind of what I did. I wrote the organizer of the conference, the same person who encouraged me to apply, and asked, "I want to give an encouraging talk where I discuss resources that were helpful to me and like books I used and communities I joined and the ways I held myself accountable and the difficulties I encountered, but it won't be anything groundbreaking about Python. Do you still think it's worth it?" This was a turning point. His reply would make all the difference. Thankfully, he responded this way. Thank you, Jason Myers. He's amazing, and he loves cookies, which I found out later. I heaved a big sigh of relief and got to work. I wrote the talk, I baked the cookies, I wore the dress, and I delivered a message that resonated with my audience, convinced experienced developers to start mentoring, and inspired new coders to continue their journey with Python. And I made great friends at that conference, who I continue to treasure even today. And since then, I've gone on to give lots of talks, from my local Python meetups to OSCON 2 weeks ago. And each time, I get a little better at confronting that critic and speaking with powerful authenticity. So today, I want to share a few lessons and examples from others in our community about how you can do the same. So let's get started. Let's start where we are. The first step is dealing with imposter syndrome. Whether you're giving a talk or organizing a workshop or mentoring others, you may find that you have to contend with an extremely common feeling right off the bat, imposter syndrome. It's a psychological phenomenon that arises from an incorrect assessment of your abilities or personal worth. Or, as Julie Pagano put in her excellent PyCon talk here, the adult version of monsters under the bed. Imposter syndrome is something that can cause you to abandon that cool project that you were working on, or never start. In fact, you might self-select out of FOSS because you don't believe you have anything useful to contribute. Essentially, imposter syndrome is the idea that you're not good enough, smart enough, and that secretly, people don't really like you. At least they certainly won't when they find out the real you. Of course, just like those monsters under the bed, it's not real. As a person in tech, you're going to have to deal with imposter syndrome at some point in your career. And if not in yourself, then almost certainly in someone else, someone you care about, a colleague, a mentee, someone you meet at a conference. So let's start by addressing it when it hits home base. What happens if you're the one who's dealing with it? How in the world can you expect yourself to do good work if you start from a place of not feeling good enough? How can we become expert monster wranglers? Well, why not start by considering something you already know or do very well? This acknowledgement alone will give you a hard fact, a truth, to counter your fears. Identify something that you've already mastered and ask yourself, well, how did I learn to do that thing? You can draw upon your experience for confidence and, in many cases, powerful analogies to your technical content. For me, my analogies are all from the kitchen, and they work. When I was stressed out about learning to code and I wanted to give up, I reminded myself of how, with years of practice, I became an expert cook. I even built a business around it. And if I could do it with cooking, maybe there were lessons from that journey that I could apply to this new scary one, learning to code. You have a lifetime of experiences that you can draw from to tell your story and get to work. How can you incorporate those experiences into your work so that others get to know you as a person and not just a developer contributor to this or that? One person who does this really well is my friend Lars. He's giving our closing keynote on Wednesday, and he's a personal pal. If you read Lars's bio, it's very impressive, intimidating even. And if you're new to our community, you might be afraid to approach him. Who am I, you might ask? But then you hear Lars give a talk where he performs on one of his weird homegrown instruments. He makes you laugh. He tells a story of a transformational motorcycle accident and a powerful translation decades in the making that brings tears to your eyes, all while giving an incredibly technical talk. In a little over an hour, he opens dozens of possibilities for meaningful connection. So you go say hi. You make a friend. At least that's how it worked for me. And there are others in our community who do this so well. As a new developer, new to this community, it meant the world to me to find out that Jacob Kaplan-Moss stood on stage here last year and gave a keynote where he refused the titles of inventor of Django and co-creator of Django. And not only that, he claimed a new title for himself, mediocre programmer. I was feeling pretty mediocre then myself. If I'd built him up in my mind, he brought us both back to earth. Likewise, Russell Keith McGee took the stage at DjangoCon Europe in June and DjangoCon US in September to share about his experience with a major depressive episode. And get ready, I hear if there's a spot available, he's going to give it again here at PyCon. He shared how he tried to tell himself that successful people don't get depressed, successful people power through, and how very wrong that was. Thankfully, he got help. And importantly, he asked a room full of developers if we were okay, and he urged us to get help if we thought we might not be. Looking around the room, I noticed that many of us were wiping tears from our eyes because we heard ourselves in this story. As someone who struggles with both anxiety and depression, this was huge for me. On a lighter note, one of the reasons I like to bring cookies to conferences is because they start conversations. They get us talking. And I wanted to share a few of my favorite cookie selfies, if you'll indulge me. So, Russell, Jacob, I'm going to get an updated one. Mark Lavin, author with Julia Ellman of Lightweight Django. Brian Witten, Lynn Root, Eric Holscher of Write the Docs and Read the Docs. He was actually my very first cookie selfie. He started it all. James Tauber, Eldarion, Josh Matthews of Mozilla. He's an awesome guy. Seriously, if his OSCON talk about encouraging FOSS contributions becomes available, you should totally watch it and follow him on Twitter right now. He has a lot of great things to say. Chris Swenson, PyDX, in the house. Ashley McNamara, Dave Roberts of Cisco, getting some Cisco action in here. Jeremy Tanner, a penguin. And Saran of Code Newbies, who has inspired me so much. So what do we make of all this, right? Being authentic means being welcoming, especially to the newbies among us. Get in the habit of sharing who you really are and your path, because sharing about your life outside of tech will make you wildly more accessible to the folks who might really want to connect with you, but who are afraid. Have you ever been afraid to approach someone? There may be people who are shy to approach you about a technical topic, especially if they perceive you as a leader in our field. They worry about embarrassing themselves or saying the wrong thing or wasting your time. In fact, this is what imposter syndrome looks like for them. Being authentic means making room for others, even if you have to squeeze a bit. So each of the folks I featured welcome us to know them as people, and not just as creators or maintainers of critical software projects. New contributors can't relate to the success of writing a crash reporting system for one of the world's most popular browsers. They can't relate to the experience of building a web framework. But maybe they've played an instrument. Maybe they've baked a cake or struggled with depression. Maybe they just really like cookies. When we tell our stories and are honest about our struggles, and yes, even allow ourselves to look a little silly sometimes, we send a powerful message of welcome to those around us. But we need to do more. Because alongside these shining examples of accessibility and encouragement, we also have this pernicious little habit of telling aspiring speakers and developers and contributors that we're not born knowing how to give a good presentation. I'm not born knowing how to write code or organize a Git repo. We say anyone can learn to do it, and we kind of expect it to happen. And it's true. You can learn. But you know what? It's hard. You might cry, you might feel demoralized, you might think about giving up, and sometimes it'll just be boring. Let's be honest with ourselves here. There's a lot of slogging through. Learning to code or contribute can be a long process, sometimes one that takes years. It's not easy, and I think we should be honest about that. The process reminds me of an experience I had in college. Yes, I baked that cake. I had a professor who I wanted to share some notes with, an outline of a paper I was writing, and I thought that seeing my notes might help her help me. Now, she's a busy lady, and she laughs as she hands them back, saying, "I don't need to see your eggshells, just show me the cake." She wanted to see the finished product, but she wasn't interested in the process. The eggshells were not important to her. I don't think it makes sense to tell people that we're not born with it, but make it look like we are. The truth is, our projects have plenty of spilled flour and broken eggshells. We've all forgotten the leavening a time or two and came up with a flat cake. And so it goes with your work. It doesn't help anyone to show only the pretty, finished version of what you're doing or who you are. Just as you need ingredients to make a cake, so does a sustainable project need contributors. And to get them, we need to be people who are willing to tell the truth about the process. Because it's the process, right? Not the finished product. That's important for inspiring others and attracting contributors and for the longevity of our work. It doesn't do the person you're mentoring or working with a whole lot of good to hear all about your successes. They can't see themselves in that. They need to hear the challenges, the dead ends, the failures, the slogging. And yeah, Drake, it's inspiring and catchy to hear the story of someone who started from the bottom, now we here. But to challenge this born with it myth, we need to tell people when they're actively engaged in it. Are you struggling? Are you okay? Can you show me your eggshells? What difficult part of your process or of writing Python every day can you share? Can you imagine if your contributing file had an imposter syndrome disclaimer? I hope you can read it. Yeah, after a quick sip. It starts, "I want your help." No, really, I do. There might be a little voice inside you that tells you you're not ready, that you need to do one more tutorial or learn another framework or write a few more blog posts before you can help me with this. I assure you, that's not the case. This project has some clear contribution guidelines and expectations that you can read here, and it's linked. The contribution guidelines outline the process you'll need to follow to get a patch merged. By making expectations and process explicit, I hope to make it easier for you to contribute. And you don't just have to write code. You can help out by writing documentation, tests, or even giving feedback about this work. And yes, that includes giving feedback about the contribution guidelines. Thank you. So I shared this slide at OSCON where I spoke 2 weeks ago, and the idea was quickly adopted by PyBee for their VOC and Batavia projects. And reading it actually, I'm a little sensitive, and it actually made me tear up because it made me think of how helpful it would have been to have when I was just getting started. So thank you, Russ, for writing this. Thank you for putting it out into the world. So to wrap up, I want to share just a few more practical tips for success in collaborative environments. Each of the following suggestions meets that born with it misconception head on. We weren't born knowing how to do this stuff, and it only helps others by having the courage to demystify our process. So first off, getting started. I'm from the South, so you know I'm going to throw a little South in there. Learning to code or contributing, progress can seem achingly slow. When my FOSS mentor got his first real dev job, that's John, I'll refer to him a few times, he thought that he should be going at 10 times his actual pace. And likewise, when he first started mentoring me, my biggest fear was that I was too slow for him, that I was holding us and the project back. Setting up the local development environment was a particular point of frustration for me. It took too long, and it was confusing. If just getting to the point where I can start developing is this hard, I thought, I am doomed when it comes to contributing actual code. A PyLadies colleague actually had the same experience. Kim Creighton, the organizer of Atlanta's Code Newbies, said that the difficulty with setting up her dev environment for her first FOSS project rattled her to her core. She wondered, am I even cut out for this? Thankfully, Kim stuck with it, and she's going to be speaking at Scotland JS in June. If somebody had told Kim, like my mentor Jean told me, that setting up local environments can take time and be confusing, and that difficulty is no reflection of one's potential, that would have helped her a lot. It would have helped her adjust her expectations and see this challenge as routine rather than as a personal fault. Sometimes setting up a local environment just takes time. But learners don't know this. New contributors sometimes don't know this. And if you don't tell them, it's easy to take it personally and get very discouraged. So I think that honesty about our processes and challenges can help us have a more realistic expectation for our work on both sides. But meanwhile, we need to make a concerted effort to keep our own expectations in check. If you're in any kind of leadership, it is totally natural to have high expectations and to want to give your folks the tools that they need to succeed. But please don't do this at the expense of being a person and allowing yourself to be seen as humble and approachable and collaborative. When we teach folks to code in particular, we challenge them to ask questions. Ask questions about what you're confused about. Just ask me. We want them to because our industry places a very high value on confidence, competence, and just figuring things out. When learners struggle, they're often convinced that they are the problem. And meanwhile, some people who could be helping them are being huge jerks. So let's be real. It can take an enormous amount of trust on someone's part to ask for help. Trust that we have not necessarily earned. It takes a faith or a hope that we won't ridicule or deride or make them feel bad for asking. Every time you ask a question as a learner, it's a risk. And if you've ever been hassled or ridiculed for not knowing something, that risk is felt even more keenly. So, how do we balance the fact that asking questions can be scary with the necessity to ask for help when you need it? How do we create a safe space? So I think given what we know about Stack Overflow and similar, we drop the expectation that learners will simply come to us and ask for what they need, without first making it clear that it's safe and that they're welcome to do so. Remember the contribution guidelines. Let's proactively make it easier for them to ask questions by modeling the kind of behavior we want to see in them. So at a very basic level, let's make sure that they know that you ask questions all the time. Newbies don't necessarily know that experienced developers do this, or they're under the mistaken impression that more experienced people ask more experienced questions. Share the specific questions that you ask and explain why they're simple. Remind them that you don't have the entire standard library memorized, and that admitting that you don't in no way diminishes you as a Python developer. It made a huge difference to me when my mentor, Jean, shared a few of the questions he asks and hears asked by even more senior people on a daily basis. So sharing honesty about his work created a mentoring environment where I was able to be honest about mine. And suddenly, all these questions that I had been afraid to ask just poured forth, and we were able to get on with our work. If patience with setting up the local environment is the entry point, and encouraging questions is what helps throughout, writing and sharing docs is what makes your work sustainable. One of the projects I'm proud to be a part of is fundraising for Read the Docs, Write the Docs conferences. Write the Docs gathers annually in North America and Europe and considers anyone who cares about communication, documentation, and their users to be a member of our community. We insist that people who take the time to write documentation for their projects tend to be more empathetic, collaborative, and invested in the success of others, because docs help set a general expectation and guidelines for collaboration. They even the playing field. Good docs make suggestions of where to start, offer places to help, and explain in detail the point of the project. Another strategy towards connecting with others is letting them know that you're still learning too. And one person I think who does this really well is Doug Hellman. When he's not working on OpenStack or writing the Python standard library by example, he's one of the longtime co-organizers of PyATL. Doug openly shares what he's learning with others, and he encourages us to do the same. And at PyATL, he chooses a variety of talks that appeal to different experience levels. His talk, mentioned here, is a solidly technical one that explores his learning and building process of Smiley, a Python application tracker. And you can hear it here at PyCon tomorrow at 12:10. Highly recommended. It's the perfect example of how a technical topic can still be made accessible to a learner by emphasizing the process. So the final step circles back to our first discussion of authenticity in tech talks. You don't have to be on stage in front of hundreds to be honest about what you're going through and how you need help. In fact, it's often a lot easier to share your scary stories one-on-one than instead of a giant room of people. The point is that you do it. So a final story. When I've been honest about my challenges, I've made the most meaningful connections with others and inspired programmers much better than me to do their best work. And when I fear that being honest will lead to rejection, that's when I know I need to push forward. So a brief example, which up till recently, I lovingly, if quietly, referred to not as learn Python the hard way, but learn Python the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad, very hard way. And not because Zed Shaw has a big personality. Actually, another reason. What a lot of folks don't know is that when I recommitted myself to learning Python, I was in a legitimate crisis. The love of my life, the man who inspired me in every way, and who I hope to spend my days with forever, left me. And he was not only my love, he was my rock star developer. In the years that we'd been together, I'd watched him go from working on his bachelor's degree in CS to senior developer for a really important company. With him, I wrote my very first line of Python. We built a web app together. He taught me Git. We dreamed up way too many ebooks and other weird Twitter bots. And then suddenly he was gone. He left, and he wasn't coming back. I felt completely broken. It took many months, but his leaving me actually became what spurred me to finally start spending time on myself and really commit to learning to code. And in fact, I don't think I've ever shared this with anyone, he wrote me a letter when he left. He said exactly that. He said it was time. He said it'd been time. He knew. So when I told this story at the Django Girls workshop that I hosted in September, I had so many women come up to me afterward and tell me how closely that hit home for them. We had amazing age diversity in our group. We had folks who were well into their 60s, and they had spent a lifetime taking care of aging parents, children, and supporting their spouses. Even taking just 2 days to do a workshop felt like a huge sacrifice for them, and they felt guilty. Hearing me say how much time I lost and how much I gave up in order to support somebody else helped them see their own situation more clearly. They resolved to stand up for their own future and path. We're nearly a year out, and many of them are deep into that path, building and learning and contributing. It might have been hard for me to share that story, but it was deeply helpful to many of the women who heard it. And that difference is really what is worth it to me. You can never really know in advance what kind of effect this kind of authenticity will have on someone. And until you get a little more practice opening up, there might be a fear in the back of your head that you're oversharing and you're going to be publicly shamed for it. And while we can't be certain that our honesty will be received positively, we do know that the alternative can actively be damaging. Not being open about how we got to where we are, not sharing resources, not admitting when we need help, none of these are good for our community, for setting expectations, for collaborating. So, why not try? We're headed in the right direction because of our willingness to show our eggshells. As much as we love cake, we have decided together that it is more valuable to be honest about the process that has resulted in this pretty thing that we made. Not only is it the truth, but here's the secret. Just like actual recipes, it results in more consistently repeatable successes for more people. That's right, we have the actual recipe for success, and it's authenticity. So go forth and be yourself, and please stay in touch. Thank you. And I would love to chat more and take pictures after the session, after the lightning talks, or throughout the next few days. Thank you so much.